Alright, let's go. We fade out of Age of Ultron and fade in with Ant-Man. If you're going to introduce someone new, you might as well do it soon after an Avengers movie when you have a more clearer field to work with. With that said, even though we haven't met Scott Lang before, we do know Howard and Peggy very well, and seeing them for the first time in the 1980s really sweetens the pot. Every time we meet someone new is a chance to shake up the formula, you know? At first, Scott Lang seems to fit the bill, being a convict and a screw-up who can't get his life together, but then he turns out to be related to the archetype we know very well by this point. He's a quippy genius with a heart of gold. I think we need to start some character variety, as in we need to see people with differing moral compasses and intellect levels. Lang, he's a different flavor but the same brand. You know, he's like Mountain Dew Livewire to everyone else's Mountain Dew everything else. But even then, at least he shakes up the formula more than his antagonist, Frank Cross. Corey Stoll is a great actor, but there just is not a ton there for him to chew on. The villain here, like with a lot of villains in the saga, sadly, is mostly surface level stuff. As is a lot of the writing. We've got characters expositing to each other for our sakes, telegraphing motivations and relationships. You know, stuff like, she's my daughter, you're her hero, he was my mentor, I'm expendable. You know, just make sure we don't get lost as an audience. Usually a strong first act that's allowed to breathe doesn't require that type of blunt exposition, but we might be entering a phase of the MCU where filmmakers and maybe audiences, I don't know, think we need to keep the momentum up and get right into the action, and so deliberate, reasonably paced first acts become more and more rare. We're also entering a phase where all of our heroes have someone in their ears all the time, which leads to dialogue covering every inch of runtime. It's a film trend in general these days, it's nothing new, but still I miss the days where characters faced problems on their own. Somehow they seem less competent when they constantly explain their thought processes or banter with their best friends all the time. It gives me secondhand ADHD. Even with all that, it's a really solid entry, and it's a testament to everybody involved that the movie is as enjoyable and fun to watch as it is. Captain America Civil War is next on the docket, which should not come as a surprise. Ant-Man overlaps with this movie just a little bit. You can tell this is a Russo-directed movie from the first few shots. It's got that Winter Soldier frame rate and cinematography. Hey, and you know what else gives this a Russo stamp? Dean. Now we know the C in MCU stands for community. Dean Pelton moved up to MIT, and it's at MIT that Tony gets confronted by someone affected by the Sokovia incident. And in true Tony fashion, he takes the ball and runs all the way home. I don't really agree with his reasoning. Sokovia should never have happened, and it was definitely his fault in the end since he created Ultron in the first place. But Tony puts the blame on him and all the Avengers. If anything, him and Bruce should be locked up. The rest of the team just helped clean up his mess. For that matter, Defense Secretary Ross's take on them doesn't make sense to me either. The Avengers were assembled after Loki's plan was set in motion. S.H.I.E.L.D. let him in while they had the Tesseract. The Avengers had nothing to do with that. And then the DC incident wasn't the Avengers' fault either, that was, also S.H.I.E.L.D. If anything, Ross should be embarrassed about this government agency that kept messing up. Nobody explains how being under the authority of the UN would have changed things for the better in any of those cases. It would not have prevented Loki from attacking New York, and it certainly wouldn't have stopped Tony from fiddling around and creating Ultron. What does make Tony stand a little more believable is his explanation that he can't keep his compulsions to be Iron Man in check on his own, that he's losing Pepper because of it. He's got an addictive personality almost. It's motivation I can accept, but it stinks that this movie has to sacrifice his great arc from Iron Man 3 just to make a little bit of shaky reasoning work in this film. Tony Stark is great and tragic, and I like him, but I'm losing more and more patience for him as we go on and on. I think the most unrealistic thing about the Sokovia Accords is the idea that the US would give any sort of power over to the UN. You'd think the crux of the Accords would revolve around the US itself trying to assert authority over superhumans in general. Having Captain America directly stand up to his country should have been too good to pass up. Instead, he's fighting against the idea of oversight, which is more of an intangible, theoretical conflict. For that matter, he does not argue his point amazingly well either. He could have pointed to the UN's chronic paralysis in the face of world events, or how most politicians care more about keeping their jobs and self-interest secure rather than doing the right thing, and giving specific examples. Anyway, I'm spending way too much time on this. Let's get back to talking about connective tissues. Somehow, it never occurred to me how monumental this movie is, in that it features the deaths of both Peggy and Howard, even though they happened years apart. As a viewer, it hit me where it hurts most, and at least that effectively bonds me to Tony and Steve emotionally, and it helps me identify with them, way more than their political arguments. Ant-Man was smart to show them right before this. More tragic? Tony mentions how his father was so proud of his time with Captain America at one point, and then we learn that Howard ended up being murdered by Cap's best friend. I just want to say the climax of this movie is awesome and really effective. You know what fight wasn't? The airport one. MCU syndrome kicks in hard here. Nobody is taking anything seriously or believes they could get hurt. It feels like kids playing on a playground. They sound like gamers playing together online. But I should say it was one of the few truly weak things about this film. Overall, the character work is strong and most of them go through some kind of arc, and the emotions are real. Plus, as far as villains go in this saga, Baron Zemo stands pretty tall. And to only have one film in between this movie and the victory lap at the end of Age of Ultron, it's a great gut punch that resets the stage. And moving on to Black Widow. You know, this is a very specific thing to appreciate, but if you watch all of these in chronological order, the Marvel title card foreshadows things you have not seen yet. It's an accidental feature that I like a lot. Now, the opening scene here picks up the baton from the close of Civil War, but everyone looks just a little off since this was filmed so long after. Would it take you out of the movie too much? Maybe not, but it could dent the immersion a little bit. What does break the immersion a lot is the dodgy CGI. Sure, Black Panther has some subpar visuals towards the end, but this film has eyesores throughout. Another symptom of late MCU that hinders the film is the tone and character banter. I like Natasha's family dynamic actually, and it sort of holds together in this viewing slot, but the problem is that all characters in the MCU eventually have this dynamic and tone. So really, in the grand scheme of things, this family is not unique at all, and their banter falls flat. A small question unrelated to anything really I had was, you know, her father, Alexei, whatever, they might have addressed this and I missed it because I had to split this movie into 3 different sessions, but why does Alexei speak with accented broken English when he used to speak it flawlessly when they were undercover? You know, it's more of a CinemaSins style nitpick than anything important, but I'm still curious. What's more important to me is this film's reason for existing. The meta reason is, you know, Scarlett Johansson went way too long without a movie to call her own, and we all missed her after Endgame. But I don't get the impression the writers and filmmakers had any more motivation beyond that. The story they crafted goes through the motions. Yeah, it picks an issue and runs with it, you know, human trafficking and violence against women, but just having an issue on your mind doesn't mean you have a compelling, character-driven story to tell. Natasha is such a mysterious, enigmatic person, and her movie should have given me a special peek behind the curtain, like let me see what makes her tick and understand her more deeply than I thought I could. But by the time the end credits roll, I don't know her any better than I did before. Sure, I learned about a couple new external bits of her background, like her family and the Red Room and all that, but she's not recontextualized as a person. I don't look at her any different after this movie. We had an opportunity to make a espionage thriller in the vein of Jason Bourne or James Bond, and this movie makes a couple overt motions to that, even telegraphing it by having Natasha watch Moonraker in the film, but it doesn't ever fully commit to that premise, and it morphs into the default MCU cookie-cutter shape by the time we get into the action. Going back to the idea of recontextualizing things, this could have linked up with Infinity War and Endgame better. We know Natasha makes a huge sacrifice in Endgame. Her journey in this movie could have entailed going through something that feeds into that choice. But as it is now, all it does is have her, go blonde off screen. This movie just exists because it has to, not because it wants to. I hate to be sour, but you know what cured my malaise? Black Panther. I am more bought into Black Panther 5 minutes in than in the entirety of Black Widow. This movie wanted to be made. Now, it mentions that T'Challa's father died a week ago, which means Black Widow happens in the few days between this and the end of Civil War. Sometimes it feels like years will go by in-universe, and then a bunch of things happen in a week, and then years go by again, and then a bunch of stuff happens in a week, and so on. Anyway, back to praising the movie. I feel like all of our Marvel heroes are just like Bond girls. Everyone says they're different, but they're not. T'Challa, though, actually is. He's not quippy. He's not a self-proclaimed genius. He's not insecure. He doesn't use humor to diffuse situations. And he has a loving relationship with his parents. Also, he goes through a true blue character arc beyond believe in yourself, or don't second guess yourself, or just do what you're doing but more. T'Challa grows as a person and adds to himself by runtime's end. All of that is, in a word, awesome. What's not awesome, though, is this nanotech stuff spreading like a bad rash over the MCU. Personally, I don't love it, and it makes everything techno-magic from here on out and just homogenizes everyone's gear. You know what? I think this is more of a Bond movie than Black Widow was. It has a Q scene, gadgets, a casino sequence, a gimmicky henchman, and basically Jack Wade in the form of Agent Ross. Following up with SpiderMan Homecoming. My very first note on this film is, that guy's from Prometheus. We start making the most of this extensive cinematic timeline by doubling back to the Avengers, Civil War, and even Iron Man 3. It's a tough thing to juggle, but Homecoming does it pretty well. Tony continues his parental arc from Iron Man 3, officially taking Peter under his wing. You can see why. This version of Peter is totally more naive, wide-eyed, younger version of Tony. And Tony puts a fine point on it with his line, "I don't want you to be me, I want you to be better." And I feel like that line had to be written by a parent. You know, with this much distance from Civil War, you'd think we'd have seen more come out of the Sokovia Accords by now. Other than turning a few of our people into fugitives, we haven't seen anything really. Superhumans, specifically the Avengers, should be under the authority of the UN, which should be a seismic shift, but so far it's business as usual, and it'll continue to be. Like, what if Tony told Peter he'll need to sign the Accords and take on a UN handler who could veto his activities if he wanted to continue being Spider-Man? And then, what if Peter chose to ignore Tony and moonlight as Spider-Man anyway because of Uncle Ben's words in his head? In the movie as it is now, Tony cautions Peter, not to go crazy, but he doesn't carry over any of the principles he had in Civil War. It's a problem I have with this movie, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy it. I actually did, of course. As overexposed as Tom Holland is nowadays, this is the most emotionally connected I've been to Peter Parker in a long time, and a ton of credit goes to the actor. If you're in the mood for more great actors, stick around for Doctor Strange. Benedict Cumberbatch, Rachel McAdams, Tilda Swinton, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Mads Mikkelsen. This has to be the most impressive cast ever outside of an Avengers film. This being a Marvel origin film, we're introduced to the title character as a cocky, quippy, self-proclaimed genius. I'd say he's modeled after Tony Stark, but frankly I think Dr. House is more apt. Now, I give a lot of these protagonists a hard time for being so much like each other, but part of the fun of watching these in order and close together is seeing the differences between them, especially how they live. Putting this and Spider-Man next to each other, as far as life circumstances go, Stephen Strange could not be any more different from Peter Parker. If Black Panther is more of a Bond movie than Black Widow, then I think Doctor Strange is more of a Star Wars movie than Guardians of the Galaxy. Guardians has smugglers and bounty hunters, but Doctor Strange has the Force, namely the Dark Dimension and the, regular dimension. The Dark Dimension is evil, and you should not draw your power from it, or you'll become evil or something. We even have a monk character fall to the dark side. This movie's good, and I appreciate them introducing this brand new facet of the universe, the mystical part of it, but at this point, it gets harder and harder to visually distinguish powers from one another. By that I mean, technology from Asgard already looked magical, and for all intents and purposes, it is magic. You could easily take Doctor Strange's mystic arts, say it's advanced science, and we'd be none the wiser. Nanotech could easily be explained away as magic, and magic could be explained as nanotech. Frankly, by now, all I see is Adobe After Effects. It's the real driving force of the universe. Speaking of driving forces of the universe, this movie makes better use of an Infinity Stone than any other one, I think. Its gimmick forms the backbone of the story and is at the heart of the climax. I have a hard time telling the difference between the Power Stone and the Mind Stone and the Soul Stone and the Reality Stone, but I know exactly what the Time Stone does. It makes the showdown with Dormammu unique, which is hard to do this deep in the saga. Something else that some might find hard to do is keep Thor fresh, but Taika Waititi gives it a go in Thor Ragnarok. Most folks watched this and called it a huge success and awesome, but tonally, it veers hard left and dangles over the precipice of parody. On paper, this should be Thor's darkest hour. He loses 3 of his closest friends, his dad dies, and Asgard literally gets destroyed. It's a personal tragedy and apocalypse movie rolled into one, and somehow it feels like Dumb and Dumber. That said, it's silly, but it still has just enough heart, even if you get the impression that part of Marvel's job now is just to keep its star actors from getting bored. I'm really disappointed that it pretty much drops the plot thread introduced in Age of Ultron, where Thor vows to investigate the Infinity Stones. That thread is snipped off in the opening minutes when Thor tells the skeleton that he looked for them for a while, didn't find anything, and then moved on to other stuff. Apparently, he did not deem the stones as that big of a deal, except, they totally are. That is a case of discontinuity, and it's a shame. What's not a shame, oh goodness, thank the god of thunder that Thor and Jane finally split up. I do appreciate the closing sequence with the remnants of Asgard on the refugee ship. It's such a contrast to Thor's first introduction in the throne room, ready to be crowned. He's come a long way since then. Now I'm left with the question of the mid-credit stinger. Do I recommend watching it or not if you're showing this to someone for the first time? I'm going to say no. It ends literally minutes before Infinity War, but it's not strictly necessary in understanding it. Plus, if we still have one more movie in between this and that, let's not muddy up the timeline. In fact, in general, I might not even recommend watching any stingers. According to Disney+, Ant-Man and the Wasp is next, though I think I might challenge that. I think I would swap this movie with Thor Ragnarok, but that might just be my preference. Whatever you do, definitely don't watch the stinger if you're watching this with a first-time viewer. Other than stingers and viewing order, I don't have much to say about this movie. It's fine enough, but I'm starting to get to a point where most of these movies feel the same unless they're outstanding. And luckily, the next 2 films are. Avengers Infinity War. It's about dang time. It's taken 22 movies and a half dozen one-shots to get here? Even after all that time, the opening sequence somehow grabs you like nothing else has so far, making Thanos the most terrifying villain we've seen. One of the many reasons why I like this movie so much is that it showcases each stone's power so well. Each one is unique, and Thanos uses them in very specific situations. Thor: The Dark World centered completely around the Reality Stone, but its powers seemed so generic and ambiguous. I thought it was basically antimatter, but it's so much more than that. The Tesseract, it kind of did whatever they needed it to. It was the Space Stone and could teleport people, but somehow Hydra also used it to make weapons. You'd think that would be a Power Stone thing. Like I said, Infinity War does a fantastic job explaining each stone. Not just that, each superhuman gets ample time to shine, which is very hard to do with an ensemble cast of this size. Marvel films don't get enough credit where it's due. This is an amazingly well-written film. There are no fewer than 3 things happening at any given time, and each branch of the plot feels like the main story. It's one of the longest, most breakneck-paced films in the saga, and yet somehow it feels perfectly natural. It never drags and it doesn't rush, and that's great pacing. Now, pacing does not mean specific beats should take a specific amount of time. It's about making sure each beat feels earned. If you do your homework, you can end up with a lightning speed plot that feels like it's taking its time. I gotta say, this is not just one of my favorite endings in the MCU, it's one of my favorite film endings, period. It could have gone down accompanied by a swelling, emotional score that tells us how to feel, but the snap sequence just happens, and we're left to take it in. It's fitting that Tony is left nearly alone. almost everyone around him getting caught up in the snap, because this is his worst nightmare come true. And now we finally come to the end of it all. Endgame. In times of tragedy, it's good to bring back old friends, which is exactly why chronological order benefits Captain Marvel so much. Her reveal, her rescue of Tony and Nebula, holds so much more weight when you have that history. Release order does not do anything for her. I wish there was just a little more ceremony surrounding her return. As it is, the movie assumes you just saw her barely, but I could have used more of a victory lap here. I definitely wish she would have gotten a scene with Fury and been able to see all that he did while she was gone. I mean, just seeing her reaction at seeing the Avengers bearing her call sign would have been cool, so that's a shame. But Endgame is the finale to this whole thing, and so it gets to double back and pay off all the setup to now. When done wrong, you get The Rise of Skywalker. When done right, you get Endgame. You know, this movie is even more breakneck than Infinity War, with a world's worth of plot to cover in only 3 hours. But the Russos do not shy away from the quiet moments. This blockbuster is a modern-day epic, but there are plenty of scenes where characters say what they need to say without winks, without action, without music. It's just people connecting with each other. And those scenes make the action that much stronger when we get to it. So many other movies like this have all the beats but none of the work, and so they feel shallow. Or they don't think big events need big follow-up. Take Natasha's death. She may not get a funeral, but our ensemble mourns her for a valuable amount of screen time. We process her passing with them. Death has consequences and even spurs our heroes on. It means something. Her death is a big checkmark in Chronologic's column. When Natasha is gone, let her be gone. Don't bring her back, and don't bring her back for Black Widow the movie. Not that Endgame does the cause and effect thing perfectly though. Smart Hulk is an effect without a cause. It's disappointing to come all this way and see Banner's huge defining moment, which is something he's been working towards since the beginning, happen off screen. His arc stumbles across the finish line. In contrast, I think I might like Thor's arc over the course of this saga the most, and his journey across the finish line is nothing but great. Look, it's Shirley. You know, it's great to see Howard in this movie. He bookends the whole thing. He may not know it, but he ends up making a whole lot of things possible. This whole world is part of his legacy. Endgame brings a lot of things full circle. This final battle, which takes place in the ruins of Avengers HQ, hits on all cylinders from beginning to end. And yes, I'm including She's Not Alone. I can accept that some viewers will be very inspired by this, and just because something is not for me doesn't mean it doesn't have value. In the end, we get a great send-off for Tony and a pitch-perfect goodbye wave to Steve. Endgame pulls off the impossible by giving, like 22 movies, a satisfying, riveting conclusion that leaves almost nothing on the table. It knows when to hold back and when to go for broke. And now that I'm at the end of it, I almost don't know what to do with myself. Sure, parts of this saga are tough to get through, but experiencing the entire thing from beginning to end is tremendously rewarding and delightful. And not even Marvel itself can recapture the magic. And yes, I know Spider-Man Far From Home is technically the end of the Infinity Saga, but let that be the opening chapter of the next story. Anyway, yeah, in case it needs to be said, would I recommend watching the Infinity Saga in chronological order over release order? Yes. This is the way to go. Enough said. I'm going to step away from the MCU for a little bit, no surprise there. I stream now from time to time. Look out for those announcements and feel free to stop by when I do. No, god dang it. Ugh. Dang it, Indigo. Why did you make him 5 years old? Only 2 of us. The oldest and the youngest of us are dead. But the normal folks are fine. Alright guys, we didn't make it. Man, I was doing fine. Oh, well, we were all gonna get it anyway. I mean, how's this? Yeah, this is Percy's POV in the afterlife. Do you think this 5-year-old went to hell? Yeah, this 5-year-old did some pretty messed up stuff. You have to give the audience time to reset and recalibrate. And Endgame was such a high that I don't think no beginning could capture the feeling and the high of an amazing end. Look forward to seeing you there. For now, stay tough and stop by again sometime.